Hello folks, welcome back to Music and Technology. This is our last week of learning for our music module. This will be the last week for discussion questions. Next week we're going to have something really fun to do to wrap up our year, but therell be no more videos, no more slides, just something fun to do. This week's folks, we're going to be talking about the second part of the mixer. So what is a submix, what does sends mean, and what does automation mean? Okay, as always, folks, you can find this presentation, in the form of slides on our Google Classroom if you wish to dive a little deeper into the content as we go pretty quick through the video. All right, let's begin. So we've talked about so much stuff over the past couple of weeks. Last week we talked about the first part of the mixer, how the mixer flows, the signal, where it comes in and where it goes out. And this week we're going to be finishing up the mixer, both in the analog mixer as well as in the DAW, the DAW as well. Let's begin. All right, so submix. So a mix can be very complex, okay? Think about an orchestral recording a whole orchestra that has different parts and many different tracks. It has 100 tracks for each different instrument group. Rather than work with all of these pieces at once, we can group them together or chunk them together, or group the tracks together into one submix so that we can control one specific, so we can control many channels at the same time in a submix. For example, in the orchestral mix, we may take all of the woodwinds together, group them together into one submix so that we can change the levels of the woodwinds as a group rather than the individual instruments. We can take all the woodwinds and change their the fade levels and the gain levels all at the same time. And we can actually add effects to a whole group of channels at the same time with the submix rather than individually. So in the end, right, you're mixing inside the group with everything at once. Okay, this happens a lot in pop music, where you get where the background music and the singers would be submixed into one group and under one fader to be able to control that. Now in our DAWs, a submix is going to use a single bus, okay, and our track outputs are going to all be grouped under one bus so that we can control it with one fader. Usually we would create a bus, okay, give it a great name, so that you don't forget what it is that you're recording, like woodwinds or something like that. Okay? And then you will route the output of those tracks to that specific bus. When you have a single aux track, okay, and you create a bus, you're then going to have just one track that you have to deal with, okay? And everything can be controlled with one fader. So to set up a bus to set up a submix and bus in your DAW, you first want to make sure that you have all of your tracks recorded. You're going to create a bus, and in your bus settings, you want to make sure that it is stereo, okay, not mono. You want to make sure that the sound is coming through both speakers, not just one left or right. You want to configure the outputs of each track, okay, to sending it to the correct bus, and you can actually send it to a specific bus, and when you name that bus, you'll actually see the name of it pop up in the specific send, which makes it a lot easier to know where it's going to go. Okay, you can create an aux track. Remember to set it to stereo, not mono, and set the input of this aux track to your submix bus, right? It's the signals are coming into the submix and through the bus, and then going out through the bus as well. So into the submix, out through the bus. You can also add inserts and plugins and effects to change the sound of an entire group when you group them into a submix like we've talked about. Okay, and this is just the signal flow, okay? So you have all your tracks, okay? And so let's take a look at it as a drum kit, for example, okay? We've got one track that has recorded the snare part, the kick drum part, the hi-hat part, okay? We are going to create our drum bus, our drum submix, okay? And we're going to send the signal from each of these tracks to that drum bus. That drum bus signal, Okay, so these are going into the bus. That signal then is going to come out into our drum aux track that we've created, which then goes out to our monitors, out to our speakers. So, because what happens, we send each individual track to the bus, then we can control that bus, adding different effects like EQ and compressor, okay? And we're adding those effects to all of the tracks at the same time, so that we don't have to add the effects individually to each track, okay? And then it sends it out as a drum aux to our monitor speakers. All right, so sends. What are sends? Whoopsies. So there are many different types of sends when mixing that you might want to route your sound to. Okay, that can be aux sends, that can be additional sends that are part of your DAW, or outside third-party sends that you may add into your DAW. Okay, and they can actually change the sound of your mix, okay, or of your specific track. So, sends are typically not in the location that you think, especially if you're assuming that the signal is entering from the top. Remember, signal always enters from the top, goes through the channel, and out the bottom through the fader, and the level that you set in the fader. Okay? Usually for sends, you have knobs that are in one place, but then they are sent to a different place. Okay, and this can get confusing. So, remember, the signal, okay, can come in before the fader, which means that the amount going to the send is going to be totally independent and not reliant on the fader that you choose, okay? Or the send can actually, the signal can come through the send and then out through a post fader, where you then can control that signal coming out, okay? The level of the signal coming out. So just let's take a look at this example. It's easier to explain, easier to understand through this example. So each send can be configured so before it comes in, or as it comes in, before the fader, or it can be controlled outside post fader, okay, depending on what your settings are. In your DAW, okay, this change can be made with a pre or post button, and usually those buttons are located either before the fader, because remember, the signal is coming in from the top, going through and out this way. Okay, so those buttons, those effects, can be plugged in before the fader or after the fader, once the signal has been adjusted with the fader as well. Okay, remember that the actual location of the send, okay, within the track signal flow, remember, where is the send being placed? Is it before the fader, or is it after the fader? And in your DAW, you can actually choose either one. Okay, so there are two uses for auxiliary sends. So in your DAW, in Logic Pro 10, okay, we have, remember, our signal is still coming from the top all the way through to the fader and out to our monitors. Okay, it's just in the digital realm. So our sends are actually down here. So when we click on them, we can say, okay, we want to copy the fader to send. We want it to be post or pre-fader. We want to set it up with our bus. Okay, but there are two uses for auxiliary sends. The first is to configure your monitor mix. Okay, so if I'm mixing a live show, the main track faders down here, okay, are set up so the monitors are set up. The monitors for the audience to listen to, okay? But there are many other monitors that are on stage as well. Monitors that allow sound to come back to the performer, to allow them to listen and hear what it's like when they play it as a live kind of sound, okay? So you can configure your aux sends to go to different monitors, okay? Especially to the monitors that your audience are going to be hearing. But you can also configure your aux sends, okay, to reverb, okay? How we can fool the listener into thinking that all of the elements were recorded in the same room. Especially when it's a digital audio recording, it's really good to set up your Aux Sends as reverb to give that kind of sound feedback as if you're in a big, large room, okay, rather than in a small little studio. Okay, and then the two different types, remember, the monitor mix and the, excuse me, the monitor mix and the reverb, okay? This first one is your monitor mix. So you have your tracks, track 1, track 2, track 3, okay? The sound is going to go right to your main out, to your main out speakers, okay? But then you create a bus, okay, for your monitors that are going to go to your audience, okay? So that all of the tracks at the same time are going to go out to your audience, okay? They're going to come through your monitor mix and then go out as well. So you almost double up on the sound. And so that the amplitude, the volume of the sound going out to your audience, and the quality, the more round fullness of the sound is being double up for your audience. And so they get a better experience of your playing because the sound is going out to the main monitors, okay, individually per track, and then they're being all sent to one bus that is then going to your aux track through your monitors and then out again to the audience. And so by doing it this way, you're doubling up on the sound, creating a more full and round sound for your audience. The reverb signal, okay, typically effect sends are set to post fader. This way, when the track fader is reduced, the effect goes down as well. Okay. Post fader is the default setting in all DAWs. No matter which DAW you use, the post fader is the default setting. So it usually doesn't need to be changed. Now, if you need to have more effects, then consider using pre-fader sends. Because pre-fader, the signal will come through the sends, okay, before it goes to the bus and out to the monitors. Okay, it'll go through the pre-fader sends that you set up here, okay, or even here, right? The signal goes up through here into your reverb bus, down through your aux reverb track that you've created, and then out to your main speakers. Okay, but you can create different effects or even add effects or reverb into your aux setting before it goes out to your audience speakers. Okay, to create that more full, rich sound as if you're recording in a very large studio or big hall rather than in a small studio. Okay, remember, we use sends for two primary kinds of signal flow. The first, to configure the monitor mix, where we would use pre-fader sends, and the level of the sends is not related to the track fader. Okay, that's pre-fader. Or we may set them up to use post-fader sends when we're setting up parallel effects, okay, with reverb, delays, and other effects that you might add. It's important to know that the aspect of reverb gives you the sense of the space that all of the instruments are in. So if you want the sense of something to be further away from the listener, okay, it helps to have a little more reverb and a little bit less of a dry or unprocessed signal. Okay, so you always want to include some reverb if you want to give the sense of a larger space. Okay, more reverb, the sound becomes more in the background. Less reverb, the sound is way up front, much closer to your listener. Okay, and just again, recap, okay, pre-post recap. So the level of the sound going to pre-fader send does not change at as the track fader changes, if this is pre-fader. Okay, so as the signal's coming in, that level doesn't change. The pre-fader sends are often used for monitor mixes, so the track fader mix has no impact on the monitor mixes, which your audience is going to hear. But post fader, so as the signal's gone through the fader, and you set up your levels, okay, the level of the sound is going to post fader send, which changes as the track fader changes, as you set it, okay? And just as a recap, post fader sends are often used for parallel effects, okay? So if you want to have effects happening at the same time, like reverb and delay, Okay, this allows the track fader to control the level of that delay effect or whatever effect you put in there, because the signal's already gone through, okay, through the fader, and now you can set those levels. So, automation. What is automation? One of the roles of the mix engineer is to guide the listener through the mix, to tell them what to focus on at each moment. Sometimes you can really forget about this. Okay, the vocalist will usually be the focus of your recording most of the time. The vocalist is usually the melody. Okay, but sometimes you may want to bring the mix up at different times. You might want, okay, when the vocalist is not singing, you may want to bring up a guitar solo or maybe add more bass at certain times. Okay, and we call this moving the mix around, when we want to bring up certain things, bring down certain things at different times in our recording. This is called moving the mix or automation. Okay, you can set any knob that you see in your DAW, any fader, any knob, to be automated over time. And in many mixes, the engineer spends actually more time drawing automation lines, as you see here, right? Telling the computer, okay, at this point in time, we're going to drop this, we're going to bring up this, we're going to drop this, we're going to pan left or right, okay? The audio engineer and you as the, both the producer and the artist, okay, you're going to spend most of your time setting the automation. Telling the computer, okay, at this point in time in our piece, in our recording, we want to bring up or bring down certain levels. Okay. There's lots of variation in how automation is set up and recorded. Okay, in some DAWs, every channel strip can have its own automation function. Other DAWs treat automation recordings just as any other recording. You hit a button and the automation moves automatically. Okay, the most common automation modes are the latch mode, which is the most useful because it latches, the computer will latch on at the level that you set it, and it will keep the levels that you set or move to wherever you want. It'll latch on to that movement until you hit stop, and nothing can change it. So it's really interesting that when you're recording, if you latch on to those knobs and set the levels when you want them, doesn't matter, even if you make a mistake or someone comes along and messes with your computer, it will always be set to that automation. It'll be latched on there. You can also set it to be touch automation so that, okay, perhaps as the recording is playing, as things are moving forward, you can touch and adjust at certain levels, and you can actually keep adjusting throughout the entire recording. Okay, it doesn't latch on, it doesn't spring back to where you had it before, it changes in real time. Okay, and you can overwrite these playbacks. All right, so mixing wrap up. Your mixing can be as creative and fun as you make it. Okay, it can be as detail oriented or as willy-nilly as you want it to be. That's totally up to you. Okay, we want to avoid the idea of fix it in the mix. Okay. Yeah, oh, okay, the recording wasn't that bad, we'll just fix it in the mix. It was not perfect, but we'll fix it in the mix. Okay, you want to make sure that you get, the best recording possible right off the bat, so it saves you time in the mix, because there's only so much a computer can do. Now, don't get me wrong, DAWs and the computer software we have today can do a lot to help with these mixes. Okay, but a lot of the time, if you have that, that best perfect recorded sound right off the bat, the less mixing you have to do. Okay, the capabilities of your mixing board is going to depend on what you're using. Analog mixing boards have less capabilities than the digital DAW mixing boards do. Okay, it's important to keep in mind the signal flow. Remember, it's coming from the top down. Okay, the signal always flows in through the top, down through the bottom, out through the fader. Okay, keep in mind the importance of automation. It will save you in the long run. Okay, and you can perfect your sound. Computer technology nowadays has that capability of, okay, I want, at this point in time, I want this to come down, I want this to come up. In the olden days, before digital DAW automation mixing capabilities were available, recording producers and mixing artists had to do that live. They had to say, okay, now we're going to, as the thing plays, we're going to change it now. And then we're going to keep playing with it all throughout our piece. whereas now we can set it in the computer and almost forget about it. Okay? Remember to always consider what you're focusing on in your mix. Where is the melody? What do you want to highlight? What do you want to showcase? And make sure that that comes out. All right, folks, that's everything for this week. Thank you so much for listening to this final week on music and technology. It's really, it sucks that we can't actually be in the classroom and use the technology, but we will be next year using, we'll either be at the school using technology at the school, or we will be taking a look more closely at free and available technology that is available to you at home. As always, folks, don't forget, please answer the discussion question for this last week of learning. And next week, we're going to be doing something fun. It's not for marks for next week. This week, this discussion question is for marks, so please make sure you're doing that. But next week, we're just going to be doing something fun. Thank you again for listening. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to fire them my way. Have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead, folks. Bye for now.